Alright, so welcome back to EBE. Thought we would go ahead and start with a word problem here. This particular one deals with hair type in Caucasians. So in Caucasian humans, hair straightness or curliness is thought to be governed by a single pair of alleles showing partial dominance. We don't have to be too concerned with partial, incomplete, complete dominance here. The rest of the question explains what that means. Individuals with straight hair are homozygous for the IS allele. So, as before, try to convert what you're seeing in text into some kind of notation or pictures to make your life easier. In genetics, we use this kind of notation to simplify word problems. All right, curly hair, homozygous for the IC allele. Individuals with wavy hair are heterozygous. So we don't need to know what incomplete dominance is. This is really all we need to know, is that these are the genotypes with their respective phenotypes. Okay, all right. In a population, there are 1,000 individuals. 245 have straight hair, 393 curly hair, and 362 wavy hair. Individuals, 245, that's 10, that's 20, 2 on to 8 is 1,000. So that adds up. We have 1,000 individuals. And then the question is, what's the frequency of the IS and the frequency of the IC allele in the population? Okay? These are individuals. All these individuals are going to dump their alleles into a bucket. They can dump 2 alleles each. That means I should have 2,000 alleles in my bucket. Okay? How many of those alleles are IS? Well, I have 245 individuals contributing 2 alleles each. That should be 490 plus the heterozygote contributes 1 each. That's 362. Over 2,000 alleles in the bucket. I see these individuals, 393 of them, each contribute 2 alleles that are ICs. 8, 18, and then the 8 is 9. 988 plus the heterozygote contributing 1 each. That's 2,000 alleles. So 393 times 2, no. 3 times 2 is 6. 18, 1 on to 6 is 7. So 786. Sorry about that. It's going to be one of those days. Okay? All right, then we can add up the numerator here. 490 and 362 is 12, 15 is 852 over 2,000. And here, 8, 14, 1 on to 10 is 11, is 2,000. Okay? All right. As I've said before, I would calculate out both of these. I understand that this is true and that some of you will be tempted on exams to do one of these calculations and then use this to get the other one. I would recommend not doing that. Do each of these calculations independently. Use them as a way to check your math by seeing if this holds true after you've done your calculations. All right, so 852 over 2,000 is the same as 426 over 1,000, which is the same as 0.426. So this is the frequency of the IS allele. And then we have 1148 over 2,000 equals 1148 is 24, 574 over 2,000. No, over 1,000. 574 over 1,000 equals 0.574. That's the frequency of the I seal. Okay? Simple Hardy-Weinberg stuff. Right? All right, so as to what we've done up to this point, we've been dealing with the evolutionary forces. That would be mutation, migration, natural selection, and then we did the genetic drift plus the sampling error type effects. That's 4 of those evolutionary forces. That should bring us to number 5, called sexual selection. Sexual selection is a term coined by Darwin in one of his books, and I've grabbed a quote of his from that book in 1871. Inasmuch as the act of courtship appears to be with many birds a prolonged and tedious affair, so it occasionally happens that certain males and females do not succeed during the proper season in exciting each other's love, and consequently do not pair. This really is a description of sexual selection. So to understand what Darwin's saying, let's go back to natural selection, which Darwin considers to be different from sexual selection. In natural selection, the idea is organisms need to survive, and then once they've done that, they can reproduce, and that this yields fitness in organisms. And this is the property that natural selection works on. Well, Darwin's description of sexual selection here has an extra step. You don't just survive and reproduce, you have to survive and then courtship, and then if you succeed in courtship, this gets you to reproduction. So Darwin says that his early thinking about natural selection was completely valid, but for some organisms like birds, and I would argue like birds and like pretty much every animal on the planet and the plants, that this step of courtship is a very important piece to this. And when Darwin's talking about sexual selection, he's really talking about this extra step that organisms engage in that allows the reproduction to occur. In some seasons, some individuals fail at this and consequently do not reproduce. So he says we need to think about this courtship step a little bit because it's important in evolutionary processes just as natural selection is. Okay? So Darwin presented basically 2 relationships that he felt were important in this underlying sexual selection theory. The first plot is for males. And if we put number of reproductive events on the x-axis, this would be number of copulations or number of reproductive attempts here. And then we put on the y-axis the fitness of males that engage in different numbers of reproductive events. And Darwin's argument is that for males of a lot of species, again, think animals and think plants again, that this relationship is basically linear with a positive slope. That is, an increase in the number of reproductive events, the number of copulations by a male, results in a corresponding increase in fitness. Then Darwin considered the same relationship here between these two variables, the number of reproductive events for females and the predicted fitness that occurs. And Darwin's argument is that this function that explains the relationship between these two variables is not the same as it is for males, that for females this relationship is decidedly different. Now, depending on who you talk to, this can have different, excuse me, shaped relationships. Darwin presented it as this. He said that there's basically no relationship between the number of copulations for females and the fitness that they derive from these copulations. Others suggest that you do get sort of an increase here in the beginning, but at some point the fitness maxes out for females, and subsequent reproductions don't change the fitness all that much. Okay, so let's go with Darwin's initial plot here, and let's just think about these two events for a second, or these two functions for a second. We could consider gametes here for a second. Males produce, in the animal kingdom, spermatozoa. In the plant kingdom, it would be sperm, and then eggs produced by females in both plant and animal kingdoms. But if we consider these different gamete types, let's look at the spermatozoa here produced by animals. Very small cells, don't contain a lot of resources. In fact, during the process of producing sperm, the cytosol is pulled out of the cells. The organelles, like the endoplasmic reticulum and the Golgi apparatus, are removed. We have this stripped-down version of a cell that basically is a set of mitochondria around a flagellar motor and a haploid nucleus in there, along with a bag of hydrolytic enzymes that will help with fertilization. There really isn't any extra stuff there. In fact, you could make a decent argument there's been selection on these spermatozoa to be able to swim long distances quickly, and to do that, you'd want to strip out any extraneous material, because that would just increase the cost of movement. Okay? All right. On the other hand, the eggs in the animal kingdom and in the plant kingdom, these are very different. So if we consider eggs of tetrapods, right, you've got a large amount of resources stored within this egg. If this were a chicken egg, all of the resources that are necessary to build a chicken are already there. They're just in the form of raw materials, amino acids, carbohydrates, lipids, nucleotides, and then these would have to be assembled based on the biological program that the DNA of that chick has to produce unique proteins to that chicken that involves mobilizing the resources from the yolk and using it to build the chick. It's not like when this egg is produced, mom can add any more material to the egg, right? The shell blocks that. So all of the material that's necessary to build that chick already has to be in this egg. And the resources in the egg, right, are in the form of those materials used to build the chick, plus carbohydrate and lipid that are used to manufacture ATP that will be used to manufacture the chick, right, through dehydration synthesis. All right, so all of the material necessary to build that chicken is already there, right? That's a huge expense. Not much expense at all, tremendous expense. Then mom is also going to put in here a lot of pre-built proteins, because early on the cell, as it divides and divides during embryonic development, is going to skip the G1 and G2 phase of the cell cycle, and we're just going to flip back and forth between mitosis and DNA synthesis. So there's not a lot of time to build proteins, because the DNA is either being replicated or being grouped into chromosomes to facilitate mitosis. Mom may also put messenger RNAs in there so that they can be translated into the proteins that are necessary for building a chick. Right? She's going to put in all these raw materials. She's got to load up the cell with this large egg cell with mitochondria, so that as divisions occur, there will be enough mitochondria to meet the metabolic demands of each of the subsequent cells produced through cleavage. In some animals, toxins are also placed in the egg to protect them from predation, but you get the idea. The egg is extremely expensive relative to spermatozoa. These are referred to as cheap, and these are referred to as expensive. Okay? If we move away from the gametes and move toward the individuals, we could ask about the commitment of each of the two sexes to reproduction. And for many animals, and for all of the plants, this is a very different expense, right? I have data here for an orangutan. The male orangutan shows up one time a year, engages in 15 minutes of copulation. Then he disappears into the woods, never to be seen again. The female, which weighs about 40 kilograms, is going to gestate, right, that new offspring here for 8 months, produce an offspring that's 1 kilogram in size, so 1/40th of her size. That's fairly large commitment of resources. Then she's going to nurse that offspring for 3 years and keep that offspring around for